Hi, everyone. Welcome to Informed Dissent, a news podcast that brings you dispatches from the gender culture war. I am the gay, not queer writer, Ben Appel, and I'm here with my co-hosts, author and journalist Lisa Sellen Davis, gender clinic whistleblower and co-executive director of LGBT Courage Coalition, Jamie Reed, the brilliant, albeit disenchanted, transsexual Cori Cohn, and the always insightful writer and researcher Eliza Mondegreen. Today, we're going to talk about the quote unquote listening session, or i.e., struggle session, with New Hampshire House Democrat Jonah Wheeler, which was hosted on Tuesday by the League of Women Voters in New Hampshire, an event that Jamie and Cori both attended, and many others attended. And so we'll hear from them about that. But first, a few headlines from this week. I'll go through them rather quickly. On Thursday, the U.S. Department of Education announced it was investigating the California Department of Education for allegedly violating the Family Educational Rights Privacy Act, FERPA, the federal law that gives parents the right to access their children's education records. So the DOE is investigating. And then yesterday, Secretary of Education Linda McMahon sent a letter to Governor Gavin Newsom stating that she had become aware of his now very controversial remarks on males and women's sports, saying that it was deeply unfair. So she wrote to him to request clarification for that and to see if he was planning on, reminding schools to comply with federal law, protecting sex segregated spaces and activities, and so on. Meanwhile, the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights has opened a Title IX investigation into Portland public schools for allowing a trans-identifying male athlete to compete in women's sports. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has ruled that Idaho can require students to only use bathrooms designated for their natal sex. The University of Maine is complying with Trump's executive order on women's sports. This came after the U.S. Department of Agriculture suspended the school system's funding for research and programs. Although public school officials in Maine said Thursday that they would not comply with the Trump administration's demand. So I guess maybe their tune will change if the administration actually starts withholding funds there. A big headline, I think, is World Athletics, which is set to introduce the mandatory cheek swabbing or dry blood test spot tests for women competing in sport. It should be in place for the athletes by the fall, and the test will be for the SRY gene, which is almost always on the Y chromosome. And the test will, if needed, will also test for testosterone levels. This was put together. This was after a working group for gender diverse athletes determined that there was new evidence that testosterone suppression in DSD and transgender athletes only partly mitigates male advantage in sports. And then what was really interesting, I thought, was that arguments about whether or not a male has gone through puberty are moot, since there is, quote, an athletically significant performance gap before the onset of puberty, end quote. And their consultation document, which received feedback from over apparently 70 individual groups, says the Independent, the document stated, quote, childhood or prepubertal performance gap in the sports of athletics specifically is 3 to 5% in running events and higher in throwing and jumping events, end quote, which is significant. So that argument that, oh, if kids, transition or we have blocked their puberty males and they, they're not going to have any advantage. Well, this shows that that is false.
And also it answers, I mean, Cori, Ben, and I were at an event where Cori spoke, and so did Kim Jones of Icons, I think, who was involved in this. And it answers the question of how do you enforce such laws, because people keep saying, what are you going to do? Like look in people's underpants. And the answer apparently is no.
Right.
No,
Cheeks.
swap their cheek.
Swab their cheek, that's it. And that's how it was. I think I read in this article too that it was like this is how it worked in maybe the 80s or the 90s and then was discontinued in the 90s or something. But yeah, there's no genital inspections. That's
God, the
completely
90s
false,
were just, God, the 90s were where it was at.
right?
Ugh.
Um,
The genital inspections or
no, the cheek swab, the cheek swab. This is apparently what has was used in the past.
Well, so there
Um,
have been different things that have been used as technology changes, and
right. But not genital, but they're the Democrats who push this narrative that these bills are going to allow, or going to subject women and girls to genital inspections is just completely false. And then I'll move through. Let's see. A DC judge denied the Trump administration's request to lift the court order that prevented its transgender military ban from going into effect. So that's still, we'll see what happens there. And then this will segue into our conversation for tonight. But this week, New Hampshire, the House passed a bunch of trans-related bills. So there was House Bill 324, prohibiting schools from providing like explicit materials to students. It's kind of regulating that. HB 712, if passed by the Senate, would prohibit elective breast surgery. And then HB 377, if passed by the Senate, would make it a Class B felony to supply puberty blockers or hormone treatments to anyone under age 18. And then meanwhile, the Senate passed SB 268 along party lines. So no Democrats voted for this, but it's identical to HB 148, which was passed by the House last week, at the end of last week, which allows the segregation of bathrooms, locker rooms, sports, and prisons by biological sex. It doesn't mandate it statewide, but it allows businesses, leagues, prisons to implement those policies if they so choose to do so, and they wouldn't be
Live free or
violent.
die.
What's that?
Live
I would call
clear
it
or
I
die.
would call it the live
That was
free.
the quote.
Yeah, David Waters. Did you know that? Okay, we'll get to that. David Waters saying on the House floor, "Live queer or die," telling kids that the 74-year-old man is
No, I
telling
didn't.
kids, "Live queer or die." Did you know that? By the way, he's the uncle of Jesse Waters, the Fox News conservative pundit.
Oh,
Yeah, which is
you
kind of
learned? Yeah. Since
weird,
Thanksgiving.
weird thing.
Viewpoint diversity in that family.
Right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so anyway, a bunch of bills there that were passed. So we'll get to what's going on in New Hampshire. So Jonah Wheeler is a 22-year-old House Democrat in New Hampshire. He took office actually at age 19 in December 2022, and he represents Hillsborough County District 33, which is where he's, was born and raised, and that covers Peterborough and Sharon in New Hampshire. He had worked prior to taking office, he worked on Bernie Sanders' 2020 campaign, and he endorsed Marianne Williamson in 2024 for president. And I think prior to that, he had expressed some support for RFK Jr. So I guess he's clearly like a kind of an independent, minded thinker. And that's been evident in the decisions that he's made since he's become a House representative, especially in the past year and a half. Last year, he got a lot of backlash from his party for voting to ban bottom surgeries for minors. So I think this was just bottom surgeries. And then this year, he voted affirmatively for each of the trans-related bills that I mentioned, except for the House Bill 324, which regulates school materials. It looks like he abstained from that vote, is what it looks like in the voting records. But otherwise, he has been earning, the ire of his party members because he's defied the party by voting affirmatively for the protection of women's and girls' spaces and for regulating or banning trans surgeries for minors and puberty blockers and hormones for minors as well. So last Friday or Friday, when he voted on House Bill, whatever it is, 148, about the spaces, segregating spaces according to sex, he gave a really impassioned speech on the floor, and it was very effective. He's really great. He's eloquent. He's just really well spoken, and he has a really good message. He listens to his constituents. He's clearly thought a lot about this issue. And then subsequently, the New Hampshire League of Women Voters said that they were going to host a listening session, quote unquote listening session.
And to their credit, they do this every month with those elected officials, but usually they're talking about bills about sewage and garbage pickup and things like that.
Yeah, so this took place in Peterborough Town Hall in New Hampshire on Tuesday. Jamie and Cori attended. So tell us, Jamie and Cori, how that went. This was supposed to be a a listening session with Jonah Wheeler. Peter Leichman, the other House representative, who's a Democrat, also voted affirmatively. He was invited to attend, but he apparently could not attend.
And he could not attend.
Okay.
He had told them the week prior he could not attend because this is a really interesting fact. None of these representatives in New Hampshire earn a dime for their work. The only income they get is $100 gas and vehicle wear and tear stipend per year.
Mm.
So Peter was working because he has to make money because he still has to have a job. So that's a good insider information why Peter was not there. He was not trying to duck out on Jonah. He actually had to make some money that night.
Good to know. So how was it? How did it go? Well, obviously we were going to stream it on Zoom because they had a Zoom, so I signed on. I think, I don't know who else did. Lisa, Eliza, a lot of people signed on. Within 20 minutes, I got Zoom bombed by who knows who, but it was flooded with porn. And in the chat, there was all this craziness written. And so the people who were running it had to shut it down. Thankfully, Jamie live streamed it on her X account. So that was where I was able to watch it. And I know a lot of people were too. So, what did you guys think about how it went?
First thing, sidebar. I think we can say that the Rad Femmes probably didn't porn Zoom bomb an event. Just going out on a limb. People who don't agree with porn probably didn't choose that as their tactic. I think we do know who attacked the Zoom.
I don't know because I went to a faith parents of faith supporting their trans kids Zoom, and that was all Christians, proper Christian support, and
that got Zoom bombed too.
It got porn bombed. What's the name for? Is there an official name for this? So could be Proud Boys porn bomb, for all we know.
Okay, well, it could be, but I still don't think it's the Rad Femmes.
Why not?
No, Cori,
could be
you're really good at the overview.
Overview. All right. Well, there was apparently a donkey.
No, we don't want to know about the porn.
Oh, okay.
Good. Well, now that you mentioned a donkey.
All right. Well, so the other matter, what is there to say, I guess, when we found out that it seemed like there was going to be a struggle session set up where Jonah Wheeler was going to be pilloried in front of a group of dissenting individuals. We thought he has taken a risk to stand up for women and for children affected by this gender trait modification stuff. And this is a really good opportunity for gays and lesbians to show up and give him some support. So some of us, on our own dime even, trekked from where we were all the way up to rural New Hampshire. We met up beforehand, a varied group of detransitioners, gays and lesbians, and Democrats and other involved people. And met over at the library, which began to start to fill up with all sorts of diverse people. I think the room had a capacity of maybe 60 or 70.
Technically, fire code was 100.
Technically, fire code was 100. There was probably 100 people in that room, but keeping in mind that it was laid out to have a lot of chairs in it, there wasn't 100 people probably could have stood in that room, but they couldn't stand there with a bunch of chairs laid out for it as well. So it was very crammed in there, and there was overflow out the door. In the front of the room, it was the three women who represented the League of Women Voters. There was the counselor, what's her name?
Karen in the blue?
Yeah.
In the blue dress. Karen in the blue dress.
Karen in the blue dress. So Jonah Wheeler and Jonah brought a friend with him as well that seemed to be, I don't know if bodyguard is the right term.
I think it is.
But it wasn't a bad idea for him to have somebody who was backing him up because it was a raucous crowd. And what can I say? There was a very bland introduction. Here's the monthly listening session for League of Women Voters. And then the moderator, whose name I am not certain of. It was pointed out to me what it was, but I think whoever told me the name had it a bit backwards. So I don't know who the moderator was, but it's evident that she was choosing the questions from the crowd in such a way that it was lined up to pour on criticism of Jonah Wheeler, starting with
Well, go
a
ahead, Cori.
statement from the who you say more about the statement.
Dan Gross, the Democratic executive chair, who apparently was reading a statement that had been apparently agreed upon by the Democratic caucus, which was a very good thrashing of Jonah. That man did not like me. So if you're imagining the room, we got there early enough and we sat in the second row. Cori was brilliant. Cori is always brilliant. Cori does brilliant things that you don't even know that they're happening in brilliance until they happen later. So we all went and sat in a row together, and then Cori disappears off into the nether, and I'm like, I'm always worried. I'm always like, where's Cori? He's gonna get beat up. Where is he? He's back and like blends right in with like the other side, hiding out, sitting intentionally, and I'm like, God, Cori's brilliant. Why
It was just
think
accident.
about that?
It was just accident.
I don't know. So we got there early, and I sat down behind this man, and I do what I do because I'm from Missouri, and I was like, hey, who are you? How are you doing tonight? He's like, oh, I'm from the Democratic Executive Committee. And I was like, oh, cool. What's your interest in this? Are you like an expert in this? Are you like a doctor or a lawyer? Like, what's your interest in gender? And he was like, oh, I'm not answering that question. Why are you an expert? And I was like, oh, yeah, I am. This is who I am. And I introduced myself. And then he got very scowly and very mad. And then I said, what do you think of these recent polls? I said, I'm a lifelong Democrat. What do you think of these recent polls that your party like the populace of your party actually stands with Jonah? And actually, the consensus within your party, rank and file, stands with Jonah. And he said, oh, it doesn't even matter what those polls say. We're in Germany in the end of 1920s, the early 1930s.
Yeah.
And we have to stand against it, even if it's the rank and file. And I was like, I think you just called me a Nazi. So I think we should probably stop talking. And he was like, I did not call you a Nazi. You just used that word. And I was like, what were you implying by saying Germany in the 1930s then?
This is an adult man, right?
Yes. I was like, what was your implication? I was like, we shouldn't talk anymore. You're mean. Of course, this is how I'm like, I'm from Missouri. You're mean to me. We shouldn't talk anymore. And he was livid. It was just like, wouldn't engage.
You know
Well,
that I go ahead, Cori. I'll bring this up after.
well, this moderator was, after choosing this gross dude, was what?
I mean, it's his name.
Yeah.
Is this the fishnet guy?
Is it what?
Was this the guy in fishnets?
No, that
No,
person's
that was
name
a different
is
gross
James.
guy.
Okay.
Which we need to talk about the journalist angle here too. But keep doing your recap, Cori.
Right. So it was pretty obvious that this moderator knew who she was going to be calling on right from the beginning. And she was, and more than anything, this is what makes it the struggle session, is that this wasn't just a listening session. This was, she had already picked up. By the way, I don't know if, I don't think I shared this with you before, Jamie, but that man that you're talking about, was his name Dan Gross?
Mm-hmm.
He was very chatty with the moderator beforehand, talking about how terrible this issue is, and what he said. What he said is that, I'm paraphrasing a little bit because I don't have a photographic memory, but his viewpoint was that didn't understand how Jonah Wheeler could support treating trans people in a way that reflects how African Americans were treated in the before the civil rights era.
Okay. So he really has drank the Kool-Aid.
Jim Crow.
And she was agreeing with that. So that made me think that her partiality might have been compromised even to begin with.
So when we very first arrived, though, the very first conversation I heard from the three moderators kept using the word cis women need to stand up for all women.
Wow.
And to me, even just that language is you've taken a stand. You're in the church.
Yeah. I will say the library had a little stand like advertising its programs, and they wanted to advertise some of the art that was appearing as like a gallery on the walls, and they had this beautiful painting of oranges, but on this little standy thing it says actual size, but the painting was much larger. So I think this library already engages in some sort of deceptive practices. So I was a little on edge.
It was an art.
A little unnerved. It's true though, Jamie.
I know.
So what this is a low fact environment. So anyway, that's I'm just joking. But part of this though, Jamie, is I didn't want to hang out with everybody in our group, because if I hang out by myself, I can maybe have conversations or overhear things or so me looking at the paintings without everybody else hanging around is how I decide I'm going to be in a little bit of a character here, right? The character I'm going to be in right now is I really am interested in the paintings. That's what I'm very interested in now. So that way I'm not flocking around with everybody else waiting for the shoe to drop. I'm somebody who's interested in the paintings at the library. So that's, I don't know, little mental character work.
It's a good tactic. I struggle though, because I want to have those kind of one-on-one conversations, but I also want to be safe. And that's where I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, also, so I'm sitting in the chair in the second row. Mr. Dan Gross is here. And then 2 seats over comes in the guy with the boom mic. And I said, "Oh, are you with NPR?" Because all the other journalists had a notepad and a camera. And I'm like, "Oh, you must be from radio." And he was like, yes, I am. And I was like, oh my God, I've sent you like 15 press releases. I've tried to contact every single person in your newsroom. And he was like, oh, are you Jamie Reed? I was like, yes, I am. He was like, yeah. And then you, what was the word? Something basically, yeah. And then you called us out as bad journalists on Twitter. And I was like, I'm sorry. I thought you might want to engage with us. And then he said, but this is the phrase that I get from every NPR station. We don't want to talk to people from out of state. We only want to talk to our local individuals. So I would love for the New Hampshire NPR station to please let the St. Louis NPR station know that they should speak to me, because they have also refused to speak to me this entire time.
Likewise, the local Indiana NPR station who have no interest in covering me ever whenever I go and give testimony on a bill that they provide news about.
Well, and I never get through on WNYC. And I keep thinking that, they're facing defunding, and a great thing for them to do would be to really try to be, if they're accepting public funding, maybe they could try representing the public, and back to this idea of what the public thinks, and that 80% or so of the public does not seem to think that males should compete against females in sports or change in their locker rooms, regardless of their identity. And it brings me back to something that a woman asked Jonah, which was fascinating and an important question during the listening session, which was, do you vote your conscience or do you vote your constituency? And obviously he votes his conscience, but Jamie, I think what the gross guy was saying to you, when you asked why aren't you doing what 80% of Democrats want, is he's saying they're voting their conscience too. That's how they see what they're doing. They think, well, I know this is the right thing, even if it's unpopular with 80% of registered voters, etc. But those also aren't the people that show up in the room to scream, right? So Jonah is doing something that's unpopular, probably to a smaller subset of voters, except that small subset is the most vocal. So everybody's voting their conscience. And our argument then that, hey, you should do this because 80% of your constituents want it. Well, I don't know if Jonah's done that polling, but it would be interesting to find out what New Hampshire voters think about these.
Oh, actually, it just came out.
Good.
We can link it. I think it's in the 80% of New Hampshire voters also want women's sports to be a protected category. I will also say, regardless of conscience, regardless of constituency, how about the Democratic Party vote the evidence? Isn't that what our party used to be? Our party would always say things like, well, we need to study this, and what the data shows us is how we should vote and lead. Well,
but they have studies that you can pick and choose. You can go to the study by the trans runner Joanna Harper and say, oh, minimal differences. People don't know the difference between studies and evidence. Trump years ago defunded, most of the Agency for Healthcare Quality Research. That might not be the right acronym. We don't have, a group like NICE that the UK has, which evaluated the evidence on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and created a systematic evidence review. We don't have those abilities in this country. We have a completely politicized peer review system in which very low quality science gets published in the most prestigious journals and cited, and any evidence disrupting that is relegated to a couple of lower down on the totem pole journals that people ignore.
Or null or no good evidence in either direction isn't published at all.
That's right.
The outcomes of those studies are like, meh, didn't show us anything. Those don't get published.
Yeah, that doesn't make for an exciting press release about your new issue that shows no change.
Right. For the people at home, do you think that Jonah held his own?
I thought Jonah was amazing.
What do you think, Eliza?
I think he was really good. He like took the criticism. He was very clear in the way that a lot of his colleagues aren't about what his job is, which is to vote his conscience and then hear about it in forums like this. And he also he would listen, and then he wouldn't let himself be bullied. And I really liked the way that he would point out, the ways that activists were behaving without behaving that way himself. And when he said at the end that he hadn't really heard a merit-based argument, that was very refreshing. I'm used, coming from progressive circles, I'm used to the rare meeting that would be contentious, and at the end everybody would just say, well, I feel like, we've really kind of made some space today for some tough conversation. And I was really glad that he didn't say that, because I'm so sick of it.
Oh, yeah. Ben, what do you think? You watched him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I thought he was great. I liked that I mean, some of the things that he said, he's like it's I mean, we're in the upside down, obviously. So it's just bizarre. League of Women Voters. I'm watching this and I'm seeing them talk about things like Jonah says, I've been listening to women. I've been listening to women. Do you want me to just ignore them? And everybody screams, yes.
Yes.
Yes, we just want you to wear that. And he says, well, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going
This
to
is
ignore them.
apparently some people think I should ignore them, but I'm not going to do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and he said, your rights end when the rights of another's begin. It's so well spoken. And he said on the House floor, and he also said like one woman cannot consent for another woman. So yes, he's like there are women who don't care about this issue. There are women who say I don't care about having males or trans women in sports or spaces, but a lot of women do, and one woman cannot consent for another woman. What am I supposed to do is just not listen to those women? But yes, a lot of the people there would prefer if he didn't. The counselor, the woman that he was with, I think you said she was in blue, her name was Karen. Is that who it was? Who was sitting next to him at the table? I never really got her name or her
Her name
position.
is Karen. She's a
Karen.
Karen.
Well, she doesn't vote. She said she doesn't vote on legislation.
No.
But I think maybe she was a representative in the past. Anyway, she was the opposition. So it's just so surreal. And then she's like, I think I would call them TERFs, and then of
Then we
course
all
and then
cheered.
the audience, um,
No, then all the people who've been called turfs for years cheered.
right,
The
right,
ones who cheered.
right,
I mean, I don't want to be called a turf, and I'm not a radical feminist.
I'm
right.
not a radical
And
feminist
I'm
either.
not even trans exclusionary. I mean, so I'm trans wiggle room. I'm a twig, but I don't
Come
I
on,
don't
Cori, you gotta
say
say something there. She just said she's trans wiggle room.
I am
or,
stepping into that trap.
or I I think the fact that you have these adults kind of using that term as a slur, whether or not the women who coined the term meant it that way, as I believe it was coined by women, that 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 they only have moral arguments, they only have insults, right? And you should listen to women, but only the right kind of women. The same way you should listen to trans people, but only the right kind of trans people. And
Well,
Cori you had a great question. Do you remember what you
well,
asked?
The quote I want on a t-shirt too.
speaking of the right sort of trans people, so when this moderator, I had noticed that she was picking out people to pick on Jonah. So she walks up the aisle, sitting more towards the back, and I made eye contact with her. I was like, sort of scowled over at Jonah, like, let's fuck this guy up. And she's like, yeah, let's do it. I was like, visibly trans, I'm gonna come up and give him the business. And she's like, yeah, you are. This is all facial expression, at least in my mind. And so she hands me the microphone and she's like, go up to the front. And I was like, okay. So I complimented him on keeping his composure. I think I would have, even if I disagreed, because admirable no matter what. And then I asked, when did the lake of women's rights dry up and become the pond of reproductive health?
Mhm.
Why is that the only women's rights issue anymore? And I asked, what can Democrats do to return back to reality? And I think I threw I don't know, Jamie, I only know my perspective from it, but I think I might have had some of the room.
Oh, okay. Yeah, actually, so Cori's speaking, and there was this woman sitting in front of Cori, the whole, like, from back on that side. I also don't know how to say these things without sounding like an asshole, but there were a lot of old women.
I would
So
call them
there,
crones.
okay. So there's the trans rights activists are like in their 20s, right? Primarily. A couple, very few older trans people, visibly trans. And then there's this whole group of just old white progressive women. Um, so there was an older woman who had been sitting in front of Cori, and when Cori first got up to speak and Cori said, "I am trans," the woman's like, "Yeah, this is perfect. Yeah, you go." And then as Cori said the phrase about when did women's rights go from being, her face went, there's something like cracked. She was like, "Oh, fuck. Wait a minute. What side am I on?" And then she just got real stoic and just sat there. And like all of her like boisterous demeanor just like shrunk. And I mean, I don't know that she actually changed her mind in any way, but something, there was some element of what just happened.
Well, speaking of the other sort of right sort of trans, one of Jonah's childhood friends came up to denounce him. And this individual is about, I guess, well, it doesn't matter what his dimensions are, but he's a tall, thin lad who was dressed like he was about to go to a rave.
Very
Yeah.
short skirt, torn fishnets.
Yes,
Yeah.
and had a young female companion who I'm sure identified as a they or a them or a he or a him.
Green hair.
Here, and it was very, it was designed to be painful. It's designed to be painful. How dare you betray me, friends, blah, 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 blah. Which afterwards, I heard a little bit more information, which calls into question the factual matter of how close they were. But whatever. It's theater, it's drama, so it's not meant to be, it's supposed to be truthy, not truthful.
I think we need to dig into this person for just a moment.
That's what I was trying to do.
Okay. So
Yeah.
this individual, how do we go there? Okay, so journalist.
Emaciated.
No, no, yes. I mean, yes, he clearly needs to eat a sandwich, but that's like neither here nor there. The issue that came up is that there were probably 6 to 8 journalists in the room. And they had on the lanyards, they were identified as journalists, they had their notebooks, like they were clearly there as that's the free press to cover this event. And Jane, the young man, rifled through. So one of the journalists stood up out of the chair. She was sitting next to him, stood up out of the chair to move forward to take a picture at one point. Jane grabbed her notebook and started tearing through it. And that journalist was very, very troubled by that experience, rightfully so, and called the person out, and they reacted very poorly with essentially this line that we've heard, which is, if you're not going to cover this issue the way that I want it covered, you shouldn't speak at all. And I have now had some interactions with some of those other local journalists. And we drafted a letter yesterday, we drafted a letter basically saying to the League of Women Voters, you're responsible for what happened on your Zoom. You were breaking fire codes and did not have a safe space, but also you need to protect journalists. Because those moderators, not only did they do a terrible job of, not being unbiased, but when you have journalists in the space who are there to keep our democracy functional, that individual, it was known that they did that to the journalist's notebook. That individual also used F-bombs towards Jonah during the event. But the League of Women Voters has a responsibility to make sure that journalists are safe. And one of the things that trans or queer goes after, in my opinion, is they don't like any boundaries and they don't like any anybody to ever say no, right? No, I don't want you in my bathroom. No, the boundaries here for the locker room. No, you're not in my sports. The whole part of the whole queering concept is nobody should have a boundary and nobody should say no. Well, that's eventually going to run up against journalists have boundaries.
Mhm.
If a journalist is covering a war, we've all kind of decided that they should not be attacked and murdered. If a journalist is going to go to the parliament in the Russian Kremlin, like we want them to have freedom to cover these things. And when the activists are also going after the journalists in that way, it was very interesting to me. I had one of the local journalists DM me and basically say, "Thank you for standing up for the for what a journalist is supposed to be."
Well, they're also doing the same thing that the Trump administration is doing in terms of trying to control how people report about him, to change who has access. They want to control the narrative in the same way, and I'm sure they're very critical of that with Trump. And what would be great is if the journalists realize that they've been participating in that, because they don't know. When I hear, Brian Lehrer, who people in New York think of as like the greatest journalist in New York City, and when I hear him cover this issue and people talk about males in female sports, and he says, but we're talking about trans girls.
Yes.
Right. And I'm like, no, but those are males, because of this happened over the course of a 10-year period, and it was attached to gay rights, and a lot of people have no idea what they were supporting, versus the heavy hammer of Trump. Trump comes in and reverses it all immediately, and it feels like an assault to people. But they don't realize that we were all similarly assaulted, just in this slow roll of it, right?
And
so maybe the journalists will start realizing that they've been doing the same thing on the other side.
Well, so there was another piece that came out in New Hampshire that came out this morning, and I initially went to write my email to that journalist the way I normally do. You covered this terribly. What a bad job. You don't know what you're doing, blah, 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 blah. And instead I went, wait a minute. Let me try to be kinder. And I simply just wrote my email and I said, listen, on paragraph 11, where you said Jonah Wheeler stated, and then 4 words in, you used the word cis woman. I said, you might not realize it, but if you were quoting me, I would have to ask for a correction, because Jonah didn't say cis woman. Jonah said woman. And you might not realize it right now, but even just using that word is showing your bias.
Well, look, the word, let me just push back on some things. Like, first of all, we don't like that. A lot of us don't like that prefix. And yet it's in the spirit of heterosexual versus homosexual. It's in the spirit of, there's one kind, here's these people are this, and that's what it's in the spirit of. It turned into a slur. It's a way to categorize people. We're talking about wanting boundaries. As far as the boundaries thing, and I've said this before, but the tantrum about boundaries, I think, stems from the whole idea of gender identity. And I know I harp on this a lot, but when you think about gender identity as this cognitive phase for preschoolers, in which they learn that there are different sexes and that they're part of one or the other, and they can only adumbrate the boundaries of those categories by stereotypes, and then it gives way to sex constancy, and they realize it's about bodies. Well, everyone who believes in gender identity is stopping at that preschool level, and no wonder they're acting like toddlers. I mean, it is a kind of arrested a lot of these ideas about gender are arresting development because they require us to not ask a whole bunch of questions about it. And I did my mini version of that, showing up at a school meeting for queer families, and I just said, you know, it was a school activity. I'd already been kicked out by the PTA and censored by the DOE, but I just kept saying, like, I'm here and I have a different idea about gender identity. And one person said, but you have to respect and you have to affirm other people's identities. And I said, well, the main thing I want to teach kids is that they're okay even if they don't, right? We want to strengthen our kids so that they feel they need that. But I think, like, demanding inclusion from the people who claim to care about inclusion, but never expect that we want to be included, that this is important, that Jamie, you and Cori showing up there and kind of demanding to be part of included in the conversation is important. And I hope that, you know, we've already seen Democrats who've stood up to the party mostly retreat.
Yeah.
Right. Seth Moulton and Tom Suozzi, and I don't know, Newsom's
Sean
Thierry, who switched parties.
Switched parties, yeah.
Well, she was voted out.
And Cori, are you saying you're leaving, or are you saying you're
going in a minute? I wanted to make one other observation before I go, though, which is that when Representative Wheeler was coming up to give his introduction, he spoke about a bill of concerning a landfill that was leaching chemicals into a lake, and the work that he was trying to do to keep the lake clean and free of contaminants from the landfill. He spoke of an inequality in the property taxing schemes that affect rural towns versus some of the cities that are in New Hampshire. There are cities in New Hampshire. I don't know, but some of the discrepancies between those, and the work that he did across parties to try to alleviate some of the extra burden that's on the rural areas, which affected his constituents. And you know, these are sort of what we consider meat and potatoes type of issues, and the belief is that people really don't care about the trans things. People do care about clean drinking water. People do care about making sure that their libraries and other institutions are funded, which those do come from property taxes. In fact, we were in a library, and they have to close libraries if they don't have the money to keep them open. How many people made any comment? How many people who were there
didn't even listen,
showed up for those issues? And in fact, when he talked about keeping the water clean for the citizens, some of the people who were there clapped for him for doing that work. But do you know who didn't clap? Any of the gender people who showed up when he talked about working. What's that?
Are you saying I didn't clap about clean water?
I'm talking about the other people.
Oh, okay.
Talking about the other people.
Okay.
But there's this belief that this is such a marginal issue and nobody cares about it. But even in that room, that listening session, it wasn't the balance of questions were about the gender thing, but there were still a few questions about the environment or taxes. No, it was all 100%. How dare you allow municipalities to have the option of creating sex segregated spaces? Everybody in that room only cared about that issue, evidently. We don't know for sure, but evidently that's the only reason that people showed up. So here's something really important to think about. If there was no controversy among Democrats over these issues, that room would have been empty or quiet, just like it was for the leach field uh, for the trash pile, or just like the taxes. But this is a huge matter of controversy, even on the left.
Yeah.
And the politicians need to understand that. That should be a takeaway for anybody who thinks that they're on the right side of this issue. It's not settled territory on the left. It is a huge bubbling controversy on the left. And with that, I have to go.
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Cori.
Cori. Till we meet again in New Hampshire.
Oh, one more note. Ben, that was an excellent job with the headlines at the beginning.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, it was, yes.
Thank you.
Indeed.
Thank you. Bye, Cori. Have a great day. Um, Eliza, you're muted. Um,
Yeah.
just to let you know, I wasn't sure if you were trying to cut in. Um, but what I was thinking about when Jamie was talking about the boundaries and the person that took the journalist notebook and so on, you're like, a lot of trans queer people don't seem to have boundaries. But I think it really also has to do with, I think it's primarily probably motivated by this narrative that they're under attack, that they're facing a trans genocide. I mean, a lot of people, especially young people, but really radicalized people, think that they can behave this way because what is coming at them is a gazillion times worse, is bona fide fascism and authoritarianism, and that their, life is being put in jeopardy. I mean, like we said earlier, we have David Waters, this, senator who's 74 years old on the Senate floor, saying to kids, to trans youth, live queer or die, live trans or die. That's inexcusable to me. And I'm not going to swear, but I could just really go off on that right now. But then we have, people in the audience that were at the struggle session, standing up and saying, like, what do you think? All these kids are going to commit suicide. People are going to kill themselves, And that is what they feel like they're facing. So of course they're going to think that they have the right to grab this journalist notebook who's participating in this trans genocide. And the only thing that disappointed me, the only thing that disappointed me about Jonah, and it wasn't his fault at all, and there was the one thing that he wasn't prepared for, was when the guy stood up and said, "What about the people that are going to kill themselves?" And Jamie said, "It's not true. It's not true, and that's actually really dangerous. That's really dangerous for you to put that narrative out there." And Jonah said, "Yes, that is dangerous," and he thought that you were saying it's dangerous to pin this on a representative. It sounds like that's how he interpreted it. He said, yes, it is dangerous to think that just because I am voting this way, that I'm going to be responsible for the death of
Right.
people.
You're right. That's not what
And
I was saying.
that's not what you were saying. What were you saying, Jamie?
So what I was trying to say is that what we know about suicide, especially in vulnerable young populations, is first of all, you should never speak or assume that an individual's suicide is based on one issue, action, part of their life. Suicide is always, always multidimensional, incredibly complex, and can never be directly said it was only this one. I'm sorry, I had a cousin commit suicide and it just like dawned on me, like, we've even in our own family sometimes have done this, but it's not the safe way to do this. The safe way to talk about suicide is never to paint it as a single dimension issue. And what that individual was saying is these children are trans, therefore, it is that correlation, not the correlation to family function, other mental health issues, the fact that they might have means or mechanisms to even complete a suicide. I mean, and then the other things we know about suicide is also that those who actually have the highest risk are not these young people.
Or that it correlates with the young people that have mental health issues as well. I mean,
But the highest rates of suicide are normally in middle-aged white men who have access to a gun.
right.
That's who commit suicide. I mean, the people we should be most worried about are some of our veterans from previous wars or even it's access to the means to complete a suicide. One of the greatest things when you're assessing risk of suicide that I would always ask these young people is there a weapon in your home?
Mhm.
You
Weapons
know,
need to be secured.
when I hear people say this, I go back to, I know that a lot of us have talked about this and know this already. I wrote about this recently for my Substack, and hopefully we'll talk about this on like a Mythbusters episode about the suicide myth. But, the Movement Advancement Project, has a guide for how to report on and talk about suicide among LGBT populations. The guide is the partners of the Movement Advancement Project are the Trevor Project, GLAD, HRC, I believe, all three of them. This guide says do not state that any kind of legislation, bill, any kind of whatever's going on is going to lead to the suicide. That is dangerous, and it actually puts into the minds of young people that suicide or suicidal ideation is a natural response to
Right.
me not getting this. It is so, and that is what you were saying.
That is what I was saying.
Is
That was the
that's
danger.
what's
There are
dangerous.
young people in this room, and you are literally telling them this.
This.
That's what these activists are telling them. What this is why one of my biggest frustrations with that side should be, it should never be that. It should say, this might feel like an attack on our community, but you are resilient and strong. You have amazing resources. Your parents are here with you today to support you. You have access to, I mean, I don't understand why we're making it as a lesbian woman, I want to tell those kids, you have all of the power inside of you to be strong, resilient. You can stand up against things that feel hard. Honestly, if they feel like this is an attack on their community, why the fuck are we telling them that suicide is the route? I would be telling them, if you actually think that I'm attacking your community, get in the streets, organize a group, stand up, organize a letter writing campaign. Why don't you show up every day at Jonah's office and try to hand him literature? Why am I telling you that you need to go commit suicide? It's a death cult. It it's it's bizarre.
But there's nothing else that justifies the interventions unless suicide is the alternative. Like they can't let go of it. Because otherwise otherwise the trade-offs would come back into the picture and we'd be like, okay, if they won't kill themselves, if they don't get it, can we possibly justify taking away, future fertility for an 11-year-old? No, of course not. Like they can't let it go, even though it's completely irresponsible. And even though anybody who really cared about these kids should be able to say, like, we shouldn't tell kids this. We should tell them what Jamie says, which is like, you're going to be okay. And you can handle it if people don't use your pronouns, and you can handle it if you have to wait until you're 18 to transition.
But then we couldn't say life-saving, because when they say it's life-saving, they mean that obviously it's not saving your life. You're not like, there's nothing wrong with your liver. Well, there might be later if you take cross-sex hormones. Anyway, but yeah, they're saying life-saving because it'll stop kids from committing suicide. And, I go back to that Chen paper from 2023, the paper from the $10 million NIH grant that's now been revoked from Trump, and that is also the same $10 million NIH funded study that Joanna Olson Kennedy did not publish her puberty blocker research from because of the political environment. But as we've talked about, 2 out of 315 of those kids committed suicide, and they were, getting top-notch gender-affirming care. And that really, it's amazing to me. I mean, I shouldn't be amazed, but 2 out of 315 is a really high suicide rate, and that should have knocked out the life-saving talking point, but it didn't.
It should have, but also working in one of these centers, I was sometimes really taken back that the basics that we knew about suicide interventions it's like the whole narrative goes, it's like it flies right in the face of what we've always been taught from like the social work world to do. So if I've got a kid in front of me who's talking about suicidal ideations and I need to make a strategy plan, my plan is not, I'm going to give you hormones. My plan is, what are you going to do within building your own toolkit? This has to be internal. When these feelings come, what is your tool? Are you going to take a walk? Are you going to pet your cat? Are you going to go? And some of these are going to sound bizarre to normal people. Are you going to go stick your hands in ice water for a minute? I need you to shock your system out of the thought process. Put an ice cube in your mouth, stick your hands in ice water. I mean, we escalate it. We go, okay, the thought came into my mind. What can I do to get it out of my mind? And we teach kids, these are your tools. Next tool. Okay, if that didn't work, let's go to your next tool. But it's all tools that we have to use internally. And we have to learn how to make the decision to override our own thinking to bring ourselves back into alignment. And everything about the trans intervention, none of that was about you address it yourself. Because then I'd say, okay, what is your exercise plan? How are you going to get exercise 3 times this week? Because we know that's going to boost your serotonin. Okay, I'm going to get off my soapbox in 1 minute. But do you know there is actually one study about adolescents that showed if I could change their sleep from getting 6 or less hours of sleep per night to 8 to 10, I actually could stabilize their mood, depression, and anxiety with no outside intervention if I could simply get their sleep patterns so that they were sleeping enough most nights of the week.
Let's have that be our one of our recommendations for this week. Everybody who's listening, try to get really good sleep every night.
But those were the things if I was actually doing my job in a gender center, my first thing to these kids would have been, you're feeling distress. Okay, step 1, how many hours did you sleep last night? What did you eat? Did you exercise at all? Have you drank any water today?
What they're dealing with is so internal. It's such an obsession with self. It's so self-centered. And to bring it to something as basic as what are your material needs? What are your human needs? They're just inhabiting this different landscape mentally because they are fashioning identities in the privacy of their bedrooms through their screens and, mimicking what they're seeing on their TikTok feeds. And
What do you mean they're getting lessons about it?
Oh, well, in school,
myths and facts in their health class.
100%.
Where the myths are facts and the facts are myths.
100%. And then reinforced at home through their screens. You're 100% right. And so to bring it from, oh, you have this gender identity that makes you special, that makes you unique, that makes you one of a kind. And it is your job. We can excavate that. And what is it? I mean, I talk to social workers who work with kids, and they say it is every day that identities and pronouns are changing. Every single day. And those identities and pronouns have to change as the result of self-reflection. And so it's just self-centered self-reflection about obsessing about where on the gender spectrum or universe or whatever galaxy they're finding themselves that day. So I would love the idea of saying, okay, what did you eat? What did you sleep? They're gonna look at you cross-eyed.
They did. But I also just knew this was what the research told me.
Right.
If you actually want to alleviate this distress, we actually have to try these things first. I actually think I would hope that the original researchers that looked at this were saying that's why they wanted these kids' mental issues to be reasonably well controlled, because they wanted these kids to have all of those coping skills already. I mean, but that's the other thing that just kind of killed me in these centers. I was like, why would I throw out 20 years of what I've been taught is the right way to intervene with kids? It's okay. Again, trans exceptionalism. I think we need a whole episode just on trans exception.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
it came up a bunch in New Hampshire that, okay, if I go to a town hall, if I go to my town hall next week to listen to my representatives and I start saying F you to the representative, do you think I'm going to be allowed to stay?
Oh, right.
Do you have pink hair?
Yeah. Okay. I get
No,
it.
I'm going to be asked to leave. Somebody's going to be like, "Oh my God, what's wrong with you? We don't talk to representatives like this. You need to leave."
Right.
But the Jane person got to do that and nobody batted an eye.
Mhm.
Like,
Right.
I'm tired of like there not being decorum rules. I had a trans activist in Montana when I was testifying who works at the local hospital as the LGBT group liaison. I'm speaking in a state house and she's behind me saying, "You're a fucking liar." What? I'm sorry. Why is there decorum? Why aren't you thrown out? Because trans somehow gets to break all the rules? That's what I think we should talk about. But we
Mhm.
should wrap up.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah.
wrap up.
I'll do my recommendation because
Good.
I've been sick this week
Okay.
and then I'm creating. My non-gender recommendation, I will not say that it's pleasant.
Uh-oh.
It's amazing. It's a show on Netflix called Adolescence, and
I've been hearing about this.
got 4 episodes, and each episode is only one shot the entire time.
Wow.
And it actually, I will say, it's related into gender in that it's just definitely has to do with the experience of young boys in today's world, adolescent boys. But that's my recommendation.
Wow. Okay, I might actually take you up on that one.
Ben?
Oh,
You got one?
no, I'll go last. Liza, what do you got?
I've been reading Amos Oz's memoir, A Tale of Love and Darkness, and it is really, really good.
Who is it?
Amos Oz, the Israeli novelist and essayist, and
And it's a memoir?
yeah,
What's it
yeah.
called?
A Tale of Love and Darkness.
All right. Okay, I'll go actually really because I'm reading a memoir by Phil. Okay, I don't know if this is going to be a controversial name to say, but I recognize the name Phyllis Chesler. Or do we know
Yeah.
Phyllis? Okay, feminist. She wrote a memoir called "An American Bride in Kabul." I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But in the 60s, she was a Jew from Brooklyn, met a Afghan student, fell in love. They got married. He kind of painted this whole picture like you're going to go to, Arabia. We're going to have this magic, like we're going to ride camels and explore. And she was, they're both existentialists and, like really hip and crunchy and cool. And then she goes and she's put in a harem. She's imprisoned in this compound with all these women and then eventually escapes and gets out. So it's a memoir about that. It's good. I mean, it's pretty well written, but I think it's a fascinating story.
Jamie?
Yes. Okay. So my non-gender thing this week is about having conversations with adolescents about the reality of owning a vehicle. So my child needs his vehicle fixed, and we have had so many in-depth conversations about how you get a car towed, how a lot of places that will fix your car will rip you off, how you have to ensure that you're not being ripped off, how you have to take a long time once your car's in the shop. It's just been really magical to see from an adolescent's viewpoint why the world should be one way and it's not. And it's so relevant to me because this kid is like, wait a minute, they just fixed the car and it's done. It takes like an hour. And I'm like, oh no, your car will be in the shop for 2 weeks and you're going to have to call 12 times. And the tow truck driver might not show up and it's going to cost. Oh, and he's just like, his mind is blown about these aspects of adulting. And it just reminds me over and over again how much adolescents have to learn about the world. We take so much that we know for granted, and they have so much to learn. And we really should go back to recognizing how much we have to teach them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Okay, good note to end on. Teach your kids. All
All
right,
right,
thanks
friends.
everyone.
See you next week.
Have a great week.
Bye.
Ciao.